Yeah, I think when you simplify things and say it just needs to change over time, everybody goes, oh, I guess that makes sense. But when you actually start thinking about all the mechanisms that need to change, the blueprints that need to change to make the things, the structure's got to change, everything's got to change. And you can't just go, well, it just did it. You have to actually show some kind of evidence, some kind of evidence that can even happen.
This is interesting to hear them say this because evolutionary biologists have done this. Just giving you one example here that's pretty prominent is proving that birds developed from reptiles. And just one particular aspect of this is feathers, right? How did feathers evolve? And well, it turns out that we can genetically alter the DNA of like crocodiles and other reptilians, specifically crocodiles in this situation, but they specifically altered a crocodile embryo's DNA to where instead of scales, it produced like prehistoric feathers. So feathers originally started out as these sort of like your own like hair, but like spikier. We'll see that as feathers evolve over time, we see them getting bushier and like they have the stuff coming off the sides of them. The point is that the experiment that was done that changed the DNA of the scales on the crocodile to turn into feathers, there was a change that was noticed and they turned into prehistoric feathers that were basically kind of like needles, but at the same time, that's how feathers started out. And we have evidence of that in the fossil record. I'm sure our neighbors really appreciate me right now. These guys are sitting here and they're saying, oh, this hasn't been done. Scientists haven't done this. They have to prove this thing. But scientists have done this. They have proven it. They have done the lab work for it. They have shown that it's true. It's just that these guys don't care to go to Google fucking Scholar or they don't understand. That's a good point. There's multiple avenues to explain their ignorance on this, but I feel like all they would have to do is go to Google Scholar and type in like, how did feathers evolve? Or what science experiments have been done to prove this particular aspect of evolution? That's all they have to do, but they refuse to do it. And I fucking hate it when people refuse to read the source fucking material, as you all should know by now.
I mean, so to have
and the
20,000 changes based on mutations.
And think about it. The point that he made, even if you give them the millions of years, there's still not enough time for all of those things to take place. And that's undirected. That's with no intelligence involved at all.
Exactly.
So this is a common talking point from creationists, is that there's not enough time for all the genetic changes to happen in order for evolution to happen. And they go through this whole long thing where they show this video, this bullshit video about how whales couldn't have evolved from land quadrupeds. It's a total bullshit video that tries to lay out how there's not enough time for the genetic changes to happen. What they fail to understand is that multiple changes can occur in an organism in a short geologic period of time, like 100,000 years or something like that, which would be short for a geologic time frame. So you can have a lot of mutations that happen in parallel with each other that shrink that required amount of time. But in order to make it sound like there's not enough time, they only have to consider things sequentially. They only consider certain mutations in a sequential manner. Like, oh, well, first this has to develop, and then this has to develop, and then this has to develop. It takes all that time in order for these things to happen, and so there's not enough time. When in reality, things can happen in parallel, and they often do. One organism can develop one trait while another organism develops another trait, and then when they mate or their groups mate, they can merge all of those changes like a fucking GitHub branch, and they can have an updated genetic code and shit.
Okay, I could go on, but there's always going to be opposing views because on both sides of the debate, the same evidence is interpreted through different worldviews. You got to remember that, people. Facts don't say anything. People say things based on their interpretation of facts, influenced by their worldview.
I do agree that we have our own interpretations of facts, or well, there are the facts and then there's our interpretation of it. But I feel like in this particular situation, these are not the same thing for the creationist view versus a naturalistic point of view. Because the naturalistic point of view has evidence. We have natural processes that explain all of this. We have the explanatory power. And you know how the creationist creationists attain all this explanatory power and how they explain everything? Oh, I'm sorry, a fucking wizard did it all. And that's their explanation for it. These are not the same thing here. I get that we have our own interpretation of the facts, and we have our own ways of putting these facts together to argue for some particular point, and that those are affected by our biases and all this other stuff. But people have to forego this entire notion that the creationist side and the naturalist side are on the same fucking level. We're not. They're proposing a magical sky wizard decided to create all of life and it created all the diversity magically out of fucking nothing. And that's their explanation for everything. They can't explain the changes in species. They can't explain the fossil record as we have it. They can't explain a plethora of things in science and history, biology, every single field of science. They have a problem with explaining shit, but they solve it. They put a little band-aid on it by saying, oh, a fucking magical wizard did it. Don't worry about it. The whole fact that they propose this magical being that exists outside of space and time just really pisses me off, because it's like I'm sitting over here combing through Google Scholar trying to figure out, like, here I am minutes before the stream Googling how in the fuck does sexual reproduction evolve? And I'm sitting there having to speed read through a scientific article figuring out like the entire history of sexual reproduction, how it evolves in a species, the drawbacks and the pros and the cons of it and all this other stuff. And what do they get to do? Oh, my magical wizard in the sky cast an incantation that created everything, and that's how I explain stuff. It's a bit aggravating. These are not the same things. These are not comparable things.